All right, Charlie, we are all set up. All right, yeah, we can get started. Charlie, can you hear me? I guess he's resetting real quick.
Hello, Scotty. Can you hear me?
Yeah, how you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
All right. Do the camera work?
Yes, sure.
Okay, I'm gonna post the questions to just you, in case you need to refer back to anything.
Okay.
All right, and all right, you have your questions. Of course, I'll be asking them to you anyways, but just in case. And like I said before, it's more to let you kind of answer questions lightly and then go deeper into specific details. Didn't want to constrain anything too much. So yeah, we'll start with some introductions. In case there's someone who's joining us now and has not seen previous videos, my name is Scotty Shaw, and we've been running this Ivy Plus Hackathon, and it is based in the US primarily. We do have working relationships with a few of the top schools. You probably noticed in the past years, we've had Duke University, Harvard University, MIT. We also have other events like the one in California. That's where you have Stanford involved. We have plans for this hackathon in the future to add Cornell and Wharton as well. But on top of that, we do try to also include schools in other places. So obviously, trying to support Dr. Mack and Universal AI University in Mumbai. We're excited to try to give you guys a little bit more, not just the online speakers like last year, but to also say, here's a welcoming ceremony at your campus. We've been working with your professors, Dr. Shilpa and Dr. Pawar, to help put that all together. I think the main thing is we want to continue these online talks. These are on YouTube. We can share the links in case someone misses it or if you need to review anything. And on top of all that, you're going to have some on-site activities, and we want to start including all of you more meaningfully. And if this goes well, then we also want to work with Charlie to include other cities like Bangkok, Singapore, Jakarta. We'll probably try to, test this with other places like London, Shanghai. Uh, but the main thing is that's why we're doing this hackathon and trying to include all of you at UAI as much as we can. So that's who I am, what I've been doing. And now our next speaker, the last one for tonight, well, this morning for all of you, is Charlie, and he's a pharmaceutical executive based in Bangkok. I guess Charlie, go and tell people more about yourself.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and discuss these medtech medicine initiatives, especially from the APAC or Asian perspective. So, a little bit about my background. I am a former military officer in preventive medicine, and I was educated in the United States as infectious disease epidemiologist doing public health. And throughout my career, I've transitioned now into more of the pharmaceutical realm. And so I worked at pharmaceutical companies formulating uh, drug discoveries as well as finished good at like vaccines or tablets, creams, ointments. And now I'm in active pharmaceutical ingredients or APIs. So basically, in my 20 plus career, uh, I transitioned throughout the different forms of medicine, so to speak. So as Scotty mentioned, currently I'm a pharmaceutical executive based in Thailand for a French-based pharmaceutical manufacturing company, and we have an operation who is located in Thailand, and we do about 99% export to the rest of the world, basically. And so after all my career being in public health and science, the transition into, let's just say, business leadership or strategy has been a very interesting uh, formulation. So, as Scotty also mentioned earlier, he and I have been collaborating over the past 2 years on trying to expand this type of initiative throughout this region. So I'm glad to be here.
Great. Thanks a lot, Charlie. Um, I think we can jump straight into the questions. The first one is, honestly, it's a pretty simple question for you. Uh, how have you seen medicine and medtech evolve throughout your time, throughout your career?
So throughout my career, I've seen the transition of medicine and medtech towards, let's just say, initially back in the 90s, it was more invasive or clinical hospital-based intervention. And then now it's more towards non-invasive tools. What I mean is that back in the 80s and 90s, the telemedicine, robotic field surgery have given way now into more like AI-driven diagnostic medicine. On top of that, what I see, as I mentioned, my background is in preventive medicine, is more not just preventive, but more personalized and data-driven analytics, empowering the patients by educating them and improving their diagnostic care through speed of information transformation.
Yeah. I forgot when it was exactly, but I have read about various surgeries that rather than they cut you open, say leg injury, rather than cutting open your leg and then uh you know I guess taking the piece of bones and reattaching them or something. Now sometimes they can and then rather than a long cut, they can just simply insert into through a couple different points. And actually, now I think about it, I think knees and hips may have been, they might be the most popular example of used to be you would have massive scars on your knees and hips where they can get into the pieces they need to fix, where now, um, you're still gonna have scars, but it tends to be maybe rather than one long scar, it's maybe three or four small scars, basically different entry points. So as opposed to everything's opened up, they just enter, specific areas, access what they need. And so, I think that's kind of what you're saying. It's a lot less invasive now. Although that's not exactly your whole point, but it did make me think of that.
Yes, exactly. So, as I mentioned, I was in the military, and part of my duties as a military physician was, developing methods as far as non-invasive surgery. Because, as you can imagine, traumatic injuries during, let's just say, battlefield conditions or even training conditions, you really want to reduce the opportunity for contamination and infection, right? So the technology to do minimally invasive surgery really espoused from that type of mentality, something that was born in the field, but yet could be applied in the hospital setting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one interesting thing is, and maybe I'm wrong, but it does seem to me over the past maybe 15 years, there's been a stronger emphasis on not just building up your body, weight training and all that, eating better, but also how dieting correctly, supplements, even what times you eat or sleep, even the concept of intermittent fasting, which means there's certain optimal times to eat and certain optimal times to not eat. I feel like these are, uh, I'm not sure how to describe it exactly, but I guess it's kind of like a factory that no longer focuses on bringing in the best talent and the best machinery, but rather optimizing the shift schedule so the employees are more effective. Maybe redesigning the layout. So the machines are the same, but now they're laid out in a way that makes things more efficient. It seems to me maybe that's kind of a little bit how it seems like pharmaceuticals has evolved along those lines as well in the past 10, 15 years.
Yes, absolutely. And that's essentially correct. It's more preventive, as I mentioned, but it's also more holistic. It's not just a, one size fits all approach anymore. Just take this pill and this will disappear, but then another symptom arises. So now doctors, through more education and more, let's just say, as I mentioned in my second point, AI-driven initiatives can look more holistically at patient care. And then on top of that, patients themselves can do their own research to not just challenge, not to say in a negative way, but in a positive way, to enhance the knowledge base of both patient and physician interaction. And this is something that most major pharmaceutical companies are really espousing in order to uh, develop and evolve along with the personalized medicine initiative.
Yeah. And I think um, that kind of does touch on some of the challenges that you've seen. What are some major hurdles that medicine and medtech has had to overcome?
Yeah, so this one's an interesting one because it's just like human nature, where whenever a new initiative is launched, it's considered like a disruption in a way, because generally the old way of doing medicine is set in stone and the standards and procedures are already there. But when we're trying to enhance or substitute these true and tried established procedures, sometimes there's a little bit of reluctance, a hesitancy in order to move forward because, you know, it's not, the knowledge is not there yet and it's not as well developed. On top of that, what we're seeing in especially in AI based let's just say knowledge gathering is that the data verification, how do we fact check the accuracy and the transparency of the source data? And that is something that is ongoing as a struggle.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think there's another issue which is not issue is not the right word. There's another feature because inherently scientific testing means we don't simply accept a new or different observation. Sometimes we say, okay, great, let's test four or five, maybe more aspects of this observation to make sure that is exactly how it is. And I think that's where it's really interesting. I've always thought people say STEM is harder than liberal arts and humanities. I always thought no, because there is no right answer, or there is very rarely a right answer when you're debating ethics and morals, or even what really happened in history. Why did someone do a certain thing? And I'm not trying to say STEM is so easy, but my reason for I don't think STEM is as hard as people think is you can prove the answer. It might take a while, but let's say we observe some unusual there's an unusual observation. All right, we might need to figure out testing, test four or five different aspects of it. But once we figure out what to test for, once we collect enough data, then the numbers prove the numbers, right? And of course, that doesn't mean suddenly STEM is easier, but I just don't think it's necessarily harder. I just think that they're hard in different ways. And I think one of the interesting things is going back to your point. I was just saying that was the backstory for what I'm about to say. Is the tricky thing about medicine is we might say, give us a solution quick, or hey, do this quick. We can't exactly just jump into something because we have to make sure, okay, maybe that looks good, but is actually good. And I think one great example is so in Chernobyl, for example, when the Soviet Union mismanaged the Chernobyl disaster, you had a lot of people who suffered radiation poisoning, and they seemed to be getting better for a few days, and then they started getting worse dramatically. And part of it is, in short, basically, the improvement people saw was those were skin cells, hair cells that the body had already produced. And so the surface that got burned, once it went away, you saw the new skin cells that had been produced before the radiation poisoning but had not surfaced. After that, then you see the collapse of the human body because nothing new is being produced correctly. And we also see that Belarus and Ukraine and Russia still have higher rates of cancer. And we can't simply just say in the scientific community, we can't simply just say, oh, that's because of radiation poisoning. There had to be a lot of tests to confirm it wasn't it wasn't necessarily, maybe it was a chemical used in pesticides. And the US has seen some of those issues. We've recently been saying, oh, there's opioid addiction in the US, and everyone's saying, well, duh. Well, yes, maybe the average person sees it, but we had to go and prove it was that rather than maybe somehow all those people were all drinking the same drink and we were reading the signals incorrectly. So I think it's one of those things where, if we're talking about the challenges of medicine, we can't just jump into conclusions. We have to do testing. And that's where it gets very tricky because sometimes you might feel like, I know in my gut, in my instinct, that is the answer, but you have to go and prove it in case your instinct is wrong or you overlooked something that misfed and misled your instinct.
Yes, exactly. And that's essentially true because the scientific method is being challenged by AI and by the short learning curves that AI is producing. Not to say that it's right or wrong, good or bad at this point, but the true and tried scientific method in order to develop a hypothesis, challenge it, and then learn from the outcomes, it takes time. And one thing that a lot of uh, general, that you say, angst against the pharmaceutical companies is that why does it take so long to develop a vaccine? Why does it take so long to develop a drug a new drug. And it's essentially because of that. It's because we want to do the proof and concept before we actually launch it. So there are many steps in the drug development cycle that include a lot of hypothesis and testing and retesting, postulation before even making it, if it even does make it into clinical trials. And even clinical trials, there are essentially three phases. Sorry, and basically the three phases are designed to ensure that what we can see is actually what is manifesting. You know, so this is why in drug discovery it takes anywhere from 5 to 8 years to even consider a single molecule uh, to be able to be uh, let's just say able to be commercialized.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the misunderstanding of how the medical community operates did lead to a lot of people, at least in the US. Of course, I think it'd be good to mention how it happened in other places, but during the pandemic in the US, some people had the wrong idea of how they create a vaccine so quickly. If they didn't know about this, it must have been planned. The pandemic must have been planned. Well, it's not that they planned it, it's that they theorized and maybe even proved to a high degree that this way of creating a vaccine will be effective against this type of thing. So it's kind of like we're going to set up a school to help train people to learn AI, even though the AI boom might not be happening right away. I'm going to practice basketball because if there's a tournament, I'll be ready to play at any time rather than, oh, here's a tournament and now I have to catch up on practicing my skills. So I think that's where a lot of people misunderstand um, the knowledge that has been built up allowed the pharmaceutical industry to predict, sometimes incorrectly, but more or less to say, this is the direction we're going in. So if we can prepare certain things ahead of time, maybe the factories, maybe the templates, maybe the delivery methods, and then we just put the pieces together like a puzzle and then manufacture the different pieces, then we'll be able to create these vaccines much faster than before. And of course, I don't know enough to discuss the mRNA aspect of it, but at least in terms of operations, I can see how that's how they were able to very quickly produce vaccines comparatively. Um, so I think, without asking the question, we did kind of cover, various hurdles and challenges that medicine has had to overcome as well as continues to overcome. So, we do want to also touch on the lighter side of things. Um, Charlie, I guess for you, you've been at a few different places, but Sequence specifically, have any recent events or innovations impacted what you do at Sequence?
Yes, so we've had especially with enhanced AI driven data analytics. So as in the pharmaceutical industry, we are very heavily regulated, as you can imagine. So we have licenses for uh, what they call good manufacturing practice or GMP in the EMEA, which is the European Union, the US FDA, Anvisa for Brazil, and several other health regulatory agencies. What they're monitoring and what they're morphing now is to adapt pre-approval processes for AI-based devices in digital health. So what this helps us is that it puts us in a new category rather than just in medical device. What it can help us is that it can now substitute Excel-based spreadsheets to more of Power BI and other coding tools to help enhance deep dive and recategorization of data. Um, it also will, as Scotty mentioned, it will help take the older technology and accelerate into new developmental phases for production level tools, also helping to optimize workflows. And from the business point of view, it's a tangible return on investment or ROI because it reduces administrative burdens. We already knew what was tried and true. We already knew the documentation is required, but now we package it where it becomes more accurate and more focused to be less error prone of the data.
Yeah. And I think another thing kind of made me think about it's not exactly recent, but and this is also not exactly your company, but to prepare for COVID in at the end of 2019. And I say 2019 because we call it COVID-19, but most countries think of it as a 2020 thing. Taiwan treated it as a 2019 thing because in 2003, they already had the issue of SARS starting in China and spreading to Taiwan. No one knew what was going on. No one had information. A lot of people died very mysteriously and very tragically, also very suddenly. So 16 years later, when the whole world is simply hearing, oh, yeah, there's another thing going on in China, Taiwan was already seeing this is the same thing that happened before. They took steps, started locking down their entry points, which is a lot easier as an island. But the simple fact is they started locking things down. They started preparing. Not to say that Taiwan did everything right. Taiwan also made mistakes, but at least in terms of the early preparations, they were able to move very fast to the point, I think by December, I want to say early December, maybe December 1st, uh, Taiwan or had already locked down and said anyone coming into Taiwan needs to quarantine. The government had already arranged to bring all the citizens back if they wanted. And so where most of the country or most of the world was seeing things were happening in January and February of 2020, but did not really take action until the US finally declared its own emergency declaration in March, mid-March. Then the rest of the world very suddenly fell in line. Taiwan by then had already had 3 full months starting back in 2019 of adapting to what had happened before and saying this is not going to happen again. And as a result, when everyone was being locked down and arguing over where they would lock down or not, Taiwan had started reopening itself, at least for its own people. And so if anyone goes back and looks, they can see Taiwan traded a couple months of uncertainty, fear, and locking down for a year and a half of living free, where other countries stumbled through their response. But then interestingly, that gets back to where we're talking about in terms of the vaccination aspect, where Taiwan did not handle that part as well. So they didn't open up to the rest of the world as quickly as a lot of people had expected, although Taiwan had opened itself up to its own people much earlier. So um, I think that is more of an event, and that did not exactly impact a company. But I do think in terms of making decisions, that's where a lot of people can see how recent events and innovations they've impacted how various entities responded to not repeat, but a similar event happening to, an event that's happening that is also similar to something that happened before.
So I would have to second that because the globalization of medicine is not as widely known. Uh, in several areas, there are endemic diseases. Like here in Thailand, there's dengue, which is not very prominent in America unless you're in the southwest area. Yellow fever is also endemic here. In Africa, obviously, Lassa, Ebola, uh, are endemic as well, but it's not as prevalent in many other regions. Uh, when I was a young preventive medicine officer in the army, I studied Korean hemorrhagic fever, and that's the same, almost the same strain as let's just say Ebola because it's a hemorrhagic fever. So. Uh, as I mentioned before, the scientific method, we don't ever discard previous uh, postulations. We always try to take something that we tried before and then morph it into the current issue or the current concern, which is like Scotty was saying earlier about mRNA. Yes, I do have a bit of experience in mRNA, and I can say that mRNA technology actually espoused in the 90s. And at that time, it was being used for potential towards transcriptive medicine, meaning trying to alter genes, trying to alter, let's just say, cancer cells, etc. But as we saw with Moderna, who is like a case study on how the the acceleration of mRNA into mass production seemed to be overnight, whereas in fact the groundwork, the foundation had been laid for at least a couple of decades before. And this is how medicine really tries to rejuvenate itself. A classic example is the influenza vaccine. Now, a lot of people will say that the flu vaccine is never right and it's just pure guesswork. Well, I would tell you from personal experience that that's not really the case. I used to work for Novartis Vaccine, where we were working on cell cultures to produce influenza vaccine in mammalian cells rather than the embryo of eggs, of chicken eggs, right? And it's not really guesswork, but it is a lot of predictive work. And when we're trying to look at what type of formulation to make for the next uh, pandemic that could occur, we look at the previous 4 to 5 years to see how each region of the world had reacted to several different strains. And that's why it's called a multi strain vaccine in order to encompass its usage throughout the world. So when we mass produce it, we don't just mass produce it for the US. We mass produce it for the US and export it from the US in order to encapsulate anything that could happen in Europe, Asia, Middle East, and even Australia. So all these strains are taken into consideration. And at certain times, due to evolution and the mutation of the influenza itself, it seems to be hit or miss.
Yeah, and I think again that goes back to, you prepare ahead of time, you practice regularly, so when the game comes up, you don't have to practice for the game. You're practiced in general. And obviously for all of you in the audience being students, you don't necessarily just show up at an exam. You revised ahead of time. You probably attended lectures, maybe not all of them, but you probably did not show up at the exam. You didn't simply show up to sit and write the exam with no preparation. The question is how much preparation you gave yourself by attending enough lectures or not, revising your notes enough or not. But rarely do you simply just walk in, sit, and write. And I think in your case, Charlie, in the medical field, like you're saying, predicting which, I guess, kind of what influenza vaccine is needed, I kind of touched on the next question, which is how medicine and tech impact each other. And this is where I can see AI would be a really powerful tool, not just AI and ML analytics for saying, hey, here are the influenza virus trends over the past 30 years, maybe eventually, 300 years. And based on that, we're getting better and better at predicting how the virus evolves. Just like how, right now we're pretty good at predicting if there's a slope, water will flow down. And of course, we could introduce factors that make it not do that. For example, there's a South American waterfall. It's very famous that during certain times of a day, there's a certain wind that blows that will make the waterfall go up instead of down. But usually we can say, okay, we can use analytics and all that, AI and ML to predict that water is going to fall down. And in this case, it's kind of like you don't have enough information or patterns. It's hard to predict where this illness is going to evolve. But once you do, it becomes much more clear. Another way to visualize this is if I give you let's say I give you 3 meters of road and I need you to tell me, is this going north, south, east, or west? 3 meters of road isn't a lot, but if I give you 3 kilometers or even 300 kilometers, then I tell you, is this road going north, south, east, or west? Right? That's a lot easier. Once you have more information, you have more history, runway, length, whatever you call it, whatever it is, it helps you project and predict much more accurately. And I think that's where the struggles of AI in medicine is that a lot of medical knowledge we have today is actually still very recent.
Yeah, so for medtech and medicine, with tech impact and moving into the future, whether it's near, mid, or long-term future, I do see that AI is becoming more and more of a core component in the overall healthcare arena. And what I mean is, as I mentioned before, preventive medicine. It's not just looking at the symptom, but it's looking at the holistic care of individuals. So one thing, preventive diagnostics, as Scotty mentioned, AI is rapidly able to analyze more vast data sets than a human, obviously. Genomics, medical imaging, you know, all these could potentially detect diseases or risk factors before the first symptoms are manifesting. So this is something that is in development and something that is very interesting for these type of hackathons is to see what type of coding tools we can build. What kind of intelligence, machine learning can we do in order to take these data analytics that are already existing and torque them in order to have them provide more insight on data configurations. Also in clinical settings like hospital, clinics. So automation of charting or documentation, this will reduce clinician, uh, let's just say burnout or the process of recording mundane, routine tasks. It can act as an intelligent administrative scribe. We see it in some recordings now. So when you're on Zoom or when you're on Google Meet, sometimes it pops up that, hey, you want to use Google AI to transcribe your conversation, yes or no. So those type of things are also becoming more prevalent. One thing, another thing that we see is wearable med tech, and what I call med tech, it's not really advanced at this stage, but even now, we're seeing and witnessing increased popularity, competition for consumer-based tools like, let's say, smartwatches, like Apple Watch versus a Google Watch, right? Where it can continuously track heart rate, blood pressure, sleep cycles, respiratory rate, etc. Well, eventually, what we are hoping to adapt that to is what is called remote patient monitoring, where we can now move into more advanced smart patches or smart biosensors, smart implants that can feed back and monitor chronic conditions like diabetes or cardiac conditions. Like for instance, let's just say that, you know, not to move into a sci-fi realm, but let's say that we have a mitral valve replacement, which is a common procedure for congestive heart failure. So when we replace that valve, we don't know when it's going to fail. We don't know if it's abnormally, being rejected or functioning. But if we had a smart device, a smart implant, we could we could encode it with a tool that could feed back that the let's just say shelf life, the useful life of that implant is decreasing, and this will help alert medical professionals towards risk before they become emergencies.
Yeah, and in fact, I think it's really interesting to think about if you compare Western medicine, more scientific based methods of discovery compared to traditional and folk medicines. Not to say either one is worse, but they developed in different times of human history with different levels of technology and awareness and knowledge, and even communication for spreading the knowledge and creating a greater educational awareness of it. Uh, it does make me think for Western medicine to focus on cures, because for the longest time we needed simply to have cures. And then it starts to move towards preventive. And it's funny because we have used modern medicine to prove sometimes that some folk remedies actually have been very successful in curing or preventing. It's just that before we did not have documented evidence to help prove it. Now we're going back and proving it. And there was a recent example, a Chinese or a Chinese American doctor, I forgot which one, but she figured out that there's a certain component in Chinese medicine that's been used incorrectly for a long time. And when she read a certain treatise, she went ahead and prepared the medicine with that one element being prepared a specific way. And she found out that it does reduce the rates of malaria to a very, very high degree. But for the longest time, people thought that did not work because they were preparing it wrong. It was a very, very subtle adjustment she made. And part of that was based on the limited technology at the time. It would not have been prepared the way we can do it now, which ironically, that would have negated the beneficial effects. She went and did it the slow, traditional way and figured out apparently there's some chemical agent in the plant that is lost if you don't do it the right way. Kind of like how we also have heard about the Japanese puffer fish. If you prepare it a certain way, it kind of makes you think, how many people died to figure out the right way to prepare that puffer fish? Um, but yeah, I think those are different examples of preventive versus curing. And of course, Charlie, like you said, it sounds like we're able to go from curing to preventing and even predicting what to prevent. And it sounds like that's kind of where a lot of the technological breakthroughs are starting to happen. All right. So if anyone has any questions, we still have a little bit of time. You're welcome to ask them. Uh, this is the last talk of this, well, my night, your morning. Like I said, we did want you to be able to start thinking ahead about what you might want to build. Um, you can start designing, you can start preparing. You just can't start coding yet, but hopefully this has been useful for you. Of course, you do need to apply your projects towards finance or medicine. We have a different finance event later, and we'll tell your professors once we confirm the time. But for tonight, or this morning, this is your chance to ask Charlie some questions about various aspects of medicine and med tech. So if you want to at least start thinking about how to apply, your skills to that, we do want you to be able to ask those questions. So if you have any questions, go ahead and ask them in the chat. All right. Well, Charlie, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing all this knowledge with us. We really appreciate all this. Of course, we'll be sure to tell you how this whole event goes with the UAI students, the way we're doing it this year, and if it goes well, and then, of course, we want to, expand how we do this and see what we can do in places like Bangkok and other cities in Thailand. So thank you for contributing and giving up so much time to help these Indian students. Hopefully, in the future, we'll be able to return the favor to you in Thailand.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me.
All right. Take it easy, Charlie. Everyone, I'm going to end the live stream, but stay on